Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are unpacking what I consider to be an absolute masterclass in modern emotional buildup. We're going to be exploring the hit show Beef. And we're not just here to recap the plot, we're here to really decode the underlying psychology that makes this story so universally gripping. At its core, Beef is the story of a failing, deeply in-debt contractor and a wealthy, seemingly perfect entrepreneur. And their lives, they completely derail after a single, honestly pretty petty parking lot altercation. It is just a brilliant, brilliant mirror into the human condition. So get ready to focus in with me because we are going to use the exact framework from the show's narrative to understand the hidden mechanics of why people finally snap. So I want to pose a question to you. What if one moment of anger actually wasn't the problem at all? Think about the opening of the show. You've got this simple, okay, albeit aggressive, near missing a hardware store parking lot, right? It's followed by a middle finger and a notoriously, agonizingly long horn honk. But here's the thing. That micro moment, that is just the spark. The real fire is the sudden exposure of literally everything buried underneath. It's this idea that the trigger isn't the issue at all. The trigger is merely a flashlight revealing the powder keg that has been sitting there in the dark for years. That parking lot incident just happened to be the exact moment the fuse ran out. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Anatomy of a trigger. Microactions, macro explosions. We really have to look past the surface level problem to understand what is actually happening when two people collide like this. Because on the surface, sure, the interactions in the show are chaotic, they're dramatic, and sometimes they are beautifully absurd. But right underneath that, it's one of the most accurate portrayals of modern life you are ever going to see. It's all about unprocessed pain colliding in real time. Look at Danny. He's dealing with a failing business, he's completely crushed under financial debt, and then you have Amy, who is trapped in this suffocating marriage and a career that just completely drains the life out of her. They're both, essentially, driving around as loaded weapons. So when they finally collide, they aren't actually reacting to a bad driver, are they? No. They're reacting to their own miserable realities. Neither character pauses, neither of them reflects, and because they completely lack that crucial gap between stimulus and response, they just immediately externalize all their internal chaos onto a total stranger. The real roots of this explosion are built on years of stress, immense identity pressure, and just severe emotional suppression. Danny has spent years under this crushing stress of trying to build his parents a house so they can return to the country. He's literally carrying the weight of his family's survival on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Amy is buckling under the intense identity pressure of trying to sell her business, Koyo House, to an insufferable billionaire, and she's doing it just so she can finally spend some time with her daughter. When you suppress emotions of that magnitude, they don't just magically disappear. They go down into the basement and they start lifting weights. And when they finally break out, they are disproportionately strong compared to the minor little inconvenience that triggered them in the first place. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 2, Survival versus Perfection. This is a character philosophy breakdown because the real friction here comes from two completely opposite ways of moving through the world. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between our main characters. On one side, we have Danny Cho. Danny is entirely driven by this survival scarcity mindset. He is resilient, yes, absolutely, but he is plagued by shame-driven decisions and he deeply, deeply avoids vulnerability. You see it in how he stress eats fast food alone in his beat-up truck, just constantly on edge. On the other side, we have Amy Lau, who represents perfection and control. She's disciplined, she's successful, sitting in her impeccably designed, but honestly totally joyless minimalist home. Yet all her success comes at the cost of intense emotional suppression, identity fragmentation, and a total lack of authentic expression. They seem like opposites, right? But they are actually two sides of the exact same deeply fractured coin. I actually want us to slow down for a second and really absorb the gravity of Danny's psychological core. I'm always one step from losing everything. Just think about the heavy, crushing weight of waking up every single day with that belief. It breeds this relentless scarcity thinking where every minor setback feels like a literal fatal blow to his survival. He is an incredibly resourceful guy, but because he never addresses that internal pressure early on or, asks for support, his scarcity mindset pushes him into making just terrible decisions. He takes jobs cutting down trees he is entirely unqualified to cut, or he gets involved in these incredibly sketchy money-making schemes, and all of that, it just traps him further and further in his own cycle of desperation. Now, let's keep that grounded perspective as we flip over to Amy's psychological core.
If I lose control, everything falls apart. Amy uses this rigid discipline and this composed exterior success to completely mask her performance-based identity. She forces this fake Zen smile for her husband and her peers, while internally, she is gripping a gun safe code or obsessively tracking down a stranger's license plate. She could have chosen to express her discomfort honestly, or allowed herself just a little grace for imperfection. But instead, she holds on so tightly to the steering wheel of her life that her knuckles are completely white, which makes an eventual crash totally inevitable.
But the blast radius extends way beyond just Danny and Amy. Let's briefly look at the secondary characters, because they represent other incredibly common, flawed ways that we try to cope with conflict. Look at Danny's brother Paul. His lack of direction creates complete dependency. He relies entirely on video games and these super volatile crypto investments because he has no real anchor in his life. That makes him so easily manipulated. Then look at Amy's husband George. On the surface, the guy seems endlessly zen, right? But his lesson is absolutely crucial. Peace without boundaries just becomes avoidance. His whole brand of toxic positivity demands good vibes only, which actually invalidates Amy's very real, very dark struggles. Being overly passive isn't being peaceful, it's just hiding from reality. Which brings us to Section 3, the escalation of ego, tracing the conflict across seasons. This is where things get really fast and really chaotic, as we see exactly what happens when the brakes are completely removed. Trace this timeline with me because the escalation is truly wild to witness. Minute 1, it's just a small conflict. A hunk, a rude gesture in traffic. That's it. But by week 2, it morphs into total identity attachment and obsession. Danny is literally sneaking into Amy's house and peeing all over her pristine bathroom floor. Amy is meticulously catfishing his younger brother online. They aren't just mad at a bad driver anymore. They are fighting an avatar of everything wrong in their own lives. And by month 3, logic entirely disappears. The petty feuds spiral into actual kidnappings and armed robbery. When ego leads the charge and individuals start personalizing every single action, they lose all perspective, and the destruction becomes absolutely limitless. As the story evolves, we see this profound conceptual shift. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that we so often think, if I just get the new house, or the new job, or if I just win this feud, I will finally be happy. But the harsh reality? Environment changes do not equal inner change. Eventually, Amy actually successfully sells her business for millions of dollars. Danny gets a leadership role at his church and finally gets a successful contracting operation off the ground. Their external situations completely evolve. And yet, they are still fundamentally miserable, angry, and empty inside. Their internal patterns remained completely rigid, even when everything in their surroundings improved. There is an unavoidable truth here, and it's one we all need to hear. You don't escape your patterns, you bring them with you. If you don't do the inner work to resolve your scarcity mindset or your need for absolute suffocating control, it simply is not going to matter what zip code you move to, what title you hold, or how much money is sitting in your bank account. That mental loop, it travels right there in your suitcase with you. Section 4, Real-World Emotional Lessons, the truth behind the chaos. It's time to transition out of the problem, guide ourselves inward, and figure out how to apply this to us. When we actually sit down and decode these arguments, a really clear pattern emerges. That explosive reaction? The reality is that it's just accumulated past tension finally coming up to the surface. Emotional suppression is never a solution. Actually, scratch that. It's not just not a solution, it's literally a delayed explosion just waiting for the right spark. And over control? The more you try to tightly control your environment or your image, the more chaos is going to leak out somewhere else in your life. But this last one, this is absolutely vital. Attacking others is really just expressing an internal state. People aren't always attacking you. More often than not, they are simply expressing their own internal pain and frustration through you. And this contrast brings us to one of the most profound truths of this entire explainer. External success doesn't equal internal peace. The ultimate irony of beef is that the broke, indebted contractor and the multimillionaire entrepreneur are emotional twins. We see Danny merely surviving in external scarcity, and we see Amy thriving in external abundance. Yet, internally, Amy feels just as scarce, just as terrified, and just as violently out of control as Danny does. It proves definitively that the metric for true peace is entirely an inside job. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into breaking the cycle, practical solutions for inner peace. We've thoroughly diagnosed the chaos, right? So now let's ground ourselves in some real, actionable takeaways. I want you to treat these 4 steps as your personal toolkit for the very next time you feel your blood pressure rising. Step 1, real-time awareness. Pause and ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Unlike Amy, who never admitted she was angry until she was actively out there destroying property, you have to label the emotion early. Step 2, emotional release. You must find healthy movement, healthy expression, or a real conversation to let the valve out before it bursts. Step 3, reduce identity pressure. Remember, you are not your success, and you certainly aren't your failures. Danny equated his entire self-worth to providing a house, and it broke him. And finally, step 4, separate the trigger from the truth. Just because you feel something strongly in the moment does absolutely not mean it is an accurate reflection of reality.
So the crucial point is this. It's not the situation that breaks people, it's the pressure they never released. The honking horn in that hardware store parking lot, that didn't ruin their lives. Decades of unreleased pressure carried silently day after day, year after year, that is what ultimately caused the dam to break.
I want to leave you with this one provocative thought today. The very next time something small triggers you, whether it's a super frustrating email at work, a weird offhand comment from a friend, or someone suddenly cutting you off in traffic, I want you to pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, is this about right now, or is this about everything I've been holding? Because I promise you, once you know the honest answer to that question, it changes absolutely everything. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and keep learning.